Okay, we're gonna try this one more time. Alright. Hi, everybody. We are back here today with Auntie and Molly. We are going to continue reading from the BFG by Roald Dahl. And I'm trying something a little different today. I have headphones on with a microphone. So please tell me if there are any problems hearing me or anything like that, because this is a new thing. All right. So for anybody who is reading along, we are on page 87. The Troggle Humper for the Flesh Lump Eater. They is always having 50 winks before they go scumpering off to hunt human beings in the evening, the BFG said. He stopped for a few moments to let Sophie have a better look. Giants is only sleeping every then and now, he said. Not nearly as much as human beings. Human beings is crazy for sleeping. Is it ever occurring to you that a human being who is 50 is spending about 20 years sleeping fast? I must admit that never occurred to me, Sophie said. You should allow it to occur to you, the BFG said. Imagine it, please. This human being who says he is 50 has been fast asleep for 20 years and is not even knowing where he is, not even doing anything, not even thinking. It is a funny thought, Sophie said. Exactly, the BFG said. So, what I is trying to explain to you is that a human being who says he is 50 is not 50. He is only 30. What about me? Sophie said. I'm 8. You is not 8 at all, the BFG said. Human being babies and little chidlers is spending half their time asleep. So, you is only 4. I'm 8, Sophie said. You may think you is 8, the BFG said, but you has only spent 4 years of your life with your little eyes open. You is only 4, and please stop higgling me. Titchy little snapper whippers like you should not be higgling around with an old sage and onions who is hundreds of years older than you. How do giants sleep? Sophie asked. They is never wasted much time snozzling, the BFG said. 2 or 3 hours is enough. When do you sleep? Sophie asked. Even less, the BFG answered. I is sleeping only once in a blue baboon. Sophie, peeping out of her pocket, examined the 9 sleeping giants. They looked even more grotesque now than when they were awake. Sprawled out across the yellow plain, they covered an area about the size of a football field. Most of them were lying on their backs, with their enormous mouths wide open, and they were snoring like foghorns. The noise was awful. Suddenly, the BFG gave a jump in the air. By gum frog, he cried, I is just having the most whoopsie whiffling idea. What? Sophie said. Wait, he cried. Hold your horse feathers. Keep your skirt on. Just you wait till I see what's going to bring about. He galloped off fast to his cave, with Sophie hanging on tight to the rim of the pocket. He rolled back the stone. He entered the cave. He was very excited. He was moving quickly. You stay where you is in my pocket, Huggy Bee, he said. We is doing this lovely bit of buck-swashling both together. He laid aside the dream-catcher net, but hung on to the suitcase. He ran across to the other side of the cave and grabbed the long trumpet thing, the one he had been carrying when Sophie had first seen him in the village. With the suitcase in one hand and the trumpet in the other, he dashed out of the cave. What is he up to now? Sophie wondered. Peep your head up good, the BFG said. Then you will be getting a fine winkle of what is going on. When the BFG came near to the sleeping giants, he slowed his pace. He he began moving softly. He crept on his toes towards the ugly brutes. They were still snoring loudly. They looked repulsive, filthy, diabolical. The BFG tiptoed around them. He went past the gizzard gobbler, the blood bottler, the meat dripper, the child chewer. Then he stopped. He had reached the flesh lump eater. He pointed at him. Then he looked down at Sophie and gave her a big wink. He knelt on the ground and very quietly he opened the suitcase. He took out of it the glass jar containing the terrible, nightmarish Trogglehumper. At that point, Sophie guessed what was going to happen next. Ouch, she thought. This could be rather dangerous. She crouched lower in the pocket so that only the top of her head and her eyes were showing. She wanted to be ready to duck out of sight very fast should anything go wrong. They were about 10 feet away from the flesh lump eater's face. The snoring, snorting noise he was making was disgusting. Every now and again, a big bubble of spit formed between his two open lips, and then it would burst with a splash and cover his face with saliva. Taking infinite care, the BFG unscrewed the top of the glass jar and tipped the squiggling, squirming, faintly scarlet Trogglehumper into the wide end of his long trumpet. He put the other end of the trumpet to his lips. He aimed the instrument directly at the flesh lump eater's face. He took a deep breath, puffed out his cheeks, and then, whoosh, he blew. Sophie saw a flash of pale red go darting towards the giant's face. For a split second, it hovered above the face. Then, it was gone. It seemed to have been sucked up by the giant's nose, but it had all happened so quickly, Sophie couldn't be sure. "We had better be skittling away quick to where it is safe," the BFG whispered. He trotted off for about 100 yards, then he stopped. He crouched low to the earth. "Now," he said, "we is waiting for the gun and flames to begin." They didn't have long to wait. The air was suddenly pierced by the most fearful roar Sophie had ever heard, and she saw the flesh lump eater's body, all 54 feet of it, rise up off the ground and fall back again with a thump. Then it began to wriggle and twist and bounce about in the most violent fashion. It was quite frightening to watch. "Ah!" roared the flesh lump eater. "Yeah! Oh!" "He's still asleep," the BFG whispered. "The terrible Trogglehumper nightmare is beginning to hit him." "Serves him right," Sophie said. She could feel no sympathy for this great brute who ate children as though they were sugar lumps. "Save us!" screamed the flesh lump eater, thrashing about madly. "He's after me! He's after me! He's getting me!" The thrashing of limbs and the waving of arms became more violent by the second. It was an awesome thing to watch, such as a massive creature having such mighty convulsions. "It's Jack!" bellowed the flesh lump eater. "It's the gruesome, gruntious Jack! Jack is after me! Jack is whack-cracking me! Jack is spike-sticking me! Jack is splash-plunking me! It's the terrible fright-swiping Jack!" The flesh lump eater was writhing about over the ground like some colossal, tortured snake. "Oh, spare me, Jack!" he whispered. "Don't hurt me, Jack!" "Who is this Jack he's on about?" Sophie whispered. "Jack is the only human being old joints is frightened of," the BFG told her. "They is all terrified of Jack. They is all hearing that Jack is a famous giant killer." "Save me!" screamed the flesh lump eater. "Have mercy on this poor little giant! The beanstalk, he is coming at me with his terrible spike-sticking beanstalk! Take it away. I is begging you, Jack. I is praying you not to touch me with your terrible spike-sticking beanstalk. Us giants, the BFG whispered, is not knowing very much about this dreaded human being called Jack. We is only knowing that he is a famous giant killer and that he is owning something called a beanstalk. We is knowing also that the beanstalk is a fearsome thing and Jack is using it to kill giants. Sophie couldn't stop smiling. What is you griggling at? The BFG asked her, slightly nettled. I'll tell you later, Sophie said. The awful nightmare had now gripped the great brute to such an extent that he was tying his whole body into knots. Do not do it, Jack, he screeched. I was not eating you, Jack. I is never eaten human beings. I swear I is never gobbled a single human being in all my wholesome life. Lawyer, said the BFG. Just then, one of the flesh lump eater's flailing fists caught the still fast asleep meat-dripping giant smack in the mouth. At the same time, one of his furiously thrashing legs kicked the snoring, gizzard-gulping giant right in the guts. Both the injured giants woke up and leaped to their feet. He is swapping me right in the mouth, called the meat dripper. He is buns-woggling me smack in the guts, shouted the gizzard gulper. The two of them rushed at the flesh lump eater and began pounding him with their fists and feet. The wretched flesh lump eater woke up with a bang. He awoke straight from one nightmare into another. He roared into battle, and in the bellowing, thumping, rough and tumble that followed, one sleeping giant after another either got stepped upon or kicked. Soon, all 9 of them were on their feet, having the most almighty free-for-all. They punched and kicked and scratched and bit and butted each other as hard as they could. Blood flowed, noses went crunch, teeth fell out like hailstones. The giants roared and screamed and cursed, and for many minutes the noise of battle rolled across the yellow plain. The BFG smiled, a big, wide smile of absolute pleasure. I is loving it when they is all having a good tough and rumble, he said. They'll kill each other, Sophie said. Never, the BFG answered. Those beasts is always bishing and walloping on one another. Soon it will be getting dusky, and they will be galloping off to fill their tummies. They're coarse and foul and filthy, Sophie said. I hate them. As the BFG headed back to the cave, he said quietly, We certainly was putting that nightmare to good use, though, wasn't we? Excellent use, Sophie said. Well done, you. The big friendly giant was seated at the great table in his cave, and he was doing his homework. Sophie sat cross-legged on the tabletop nearby, watching him at work. The glass jar containing the one and only good dream they had caught the day stood between them. The BFG, with great care and patience, was printing something on a piece of paper with an enormous pencil. What are you writing? Sophie asked him. Every dream is having its special label on the bottle, the BFG said. How else could I be finding the one I am wanting in a hurry? But can you really and truly tell what sort of dream is going to be simply by listening to it? Sophie asked. I can, the BFG said, not looking up. But how? Is it by the way it hums and buzzes? You is more or less right, the BFG said. Every dream in the world is making a different sort of buzzy hum music, and these grand swashbuckling ears of mine is able to read that music. By music, do you mean tunes? I is not meaning tunes. Then what do you mean? Human beings is having their own music, right or left. Right, Sophie said. Lots of music. And sometimes human beings is very overcome when they is hearing wondrous music. They is getting shivers down their spindles. Right or left? Right, Sophie said. So the music is saying something to them. It is sending a message. I do not think the human beings is knowing what the message is, but they is loving it just the same. That's about right, Sophie said. But because of these jump squiffling ears of mine, the BFG said, I is not only able to hear the music that dreams is making, but I is understanding it too. What do you mean, understanding it? Sophie said. I can read it, the BFG said. It talks to me. It is like a language. I find that just a little hard to believe, Sophie said. I'll bet you is also finding it hard to believe in quagwinkles, the BFG said, and how they is visiting us from the stars. Of course I don't believe that, Sophie said. The BFG regarded her gravely with those huge eyes of his. I hope you will forgive me, he said, but if I tell you that human beings is thinking they is very clever, then they is not. They is nearly all of them not muchers and squeak pips. I beg your pardon? Sophie said. The matter with human beings, the BFG went on, is that they is absolutely refusing to believe in anything unless they is actually seeing it right in front of their own schnozzles. Of course quagwinkles is existing. I is meeting them often. I is even chittering to them. He turned away contemptuously from Sophie and resumed his writing. Sophie moved over to read what he had written so boldly. The letters were printed big and bold, but were not very well formed. Here is what it said. This dream is about how I is saving my teacher from drowning. I is diving into the river from a high bridge, and I is diving into the river from a high bridge, and I is dragging my teacher to the bank, and then I is giving him the kiss of death. The kiss of what? Sophie asked. The BFG stopped writing and raised his head slowly. His eyes rested on Sophie's face. I is telling you once before, he said quietly, that I is never having a chance to go to school. I is full of mistakes. That is not my fault. I do my best. You is a lovely little girl, but please remember that you is not exactly Miss Know-Everything yourself. I'm sorry, Sophie said. I really am. It is very rude of me to keep correcting you. The BFG gazed at her for a while longer. Then he bent his head again to his slow, laborious writing. Tell me honestly, Sophie said, if you blew this dream into my bedroom when I was asleep, would I really and truly start dreaming about how I saved my teacher from drowning by diving off a bridge? More, the BFG said. A lot more. But I cannot be scribbling the whole grub-flunking dream on a titchy little bit of paper. Of course there is more. The BFG laid down his pencil and placed one massive ear close to the jar. For about 30 seconds he listened intently. Yes, he said, nodding his great head solemnly up and down. This dream is continuing very nice. It has a very dory-hunky ending. How does it end? Sophie said. Please tell me. You would be dreaming, the BFG said, that the morning after you is saving the teacher from a river, you is arriving at school and you is seeing all the 500 pupils sitting in the assembly hall, and all of the teachers as well. And the head teacher is then standing up and saying, I is wanting the whole school to give 3 cheers for Sophie because she is so brave and is saving the life of our fine arithmetic teacher, Mr. Figgins, who was unfortunately pushed off a bridge into the river by our gym teacher, Miss Amelia Upscotch. So, 3 cheers for Sophie. And the whole school is then cheering like mad and shouting bravo, well done, and forever after that, even when you is getting your sums all gum twizzled and muggled up, Mr. Figgins is always giving you 10 out of 10 and writing good work, Sophie, in your exercise book. Then you was waking up.
I like that dream,
Sophie said. Of course you like it, the BFG said. It's a fizz wizard. He licked the back of the label and stuck it on the jar. I usually write a bit more on this in the labels, he said, but you is watching me and making me jumpsy.
I'll go and sit somewhere else,
Sophie said. Don't go, he said. Look in the jar carefully, and I think you has been seeing this dream. Sophie peered into the jar, and there, sure enough, she saw the faint translucent outline of something the size of a hen's egg. There was just a touch of color in it, a pale, soft green, shimmering and very beautiful. There it lay, this small, oblong, sea-green, jellyish thing at the bottom of the jar, quite peacefully, but pulsing gently, the whole of it moving in and out ever so slightly, as though it were breathing.
It's moving, Sophie cried. It's alive.
Of course it's alive.
What will you feed it on?
Sophie asked. It is not needing any food, the BFG told her.
That's cruel, Sophie said. Everything alive needs food of some sort, even trees and plants.
The north wind is alive, the BFG said. It is moving. It touches you on the cheek and on the hands, but nobody is feeding it. Sophie was silent. This extraordinary giant was disturbing her ideas. He seemed to be leading her towards mysteries that were beyond her understanding. A dream is not needing anything, the BFG went on. If it is a good one, it is waiting peacefully forever until it is released and allowed to do its job. If it is a bad one, it is always fighting to get out. The BFG stood up and walked over to one of the many shelves and placed the latest jar among the thousands of others.
Please, can I see some of the other dreams?
Sophie asked him. The BFG hesitated. Nobody has ever seen them before, he said, but perhaps after all I is letting you have a little peep. He picked her up off the table and stood her on the palm of one of his huge hands. He carried her towards the shelves. Over here is someone for good dreams, he said. The fizz wizards.
Would you hold me closer so I can read the labels?
Sophie said. My labels is only telling bits of it, the BFG said. The dreams is usually much longer. The labels is just to remind me. Sophie started to read the labels. The first one seemed long enough to her. It went right around the jar, and as she read it, she had to keep turning the jar. This is what it said. Today, I is sitting in class, and I discovered that if I is staring very hard at my teacher in a special way, I is able to put her to sleep. So I keep staring at her, and in the end, her head drops onto her desk, and she goes fast asleep and snorkles loudly. Then in marches the head teacher, and he shouts, "Wake up, Miss Plumbridge! How dare you go to sleep in class? Go fetch your hat and coat and leave this school forever. You is sacked." But in a jiffy, I is putting the head teacher to sleep as well, and he just crumples slowly to the floor like a lump of jelly, and there he lies all in a heap and starts snorkeling even louder than Miss Plumbridge. And then I is hearing my mummy's voice say, "Wake up, your breakfast is ready."
What a funny dream,
Sophie said. It's a bell ringer, the BFG said. It's Whoopsie. Inside the jar, just below the edge of the label, Sophie could see the putting to sleep dream lying peacefully on the bottom, pulsing gently, sea green like the other one, but perhaps a trifle larger.
Do you have separate dreams for boys and girls?
Sophie asked. Of course, the BFG said. If I is giving a girl dreams to a boy, even when it is really a whoopsie girl's dream, the boy will be waking up and thinking, what a rot-bungling, Greek-sludging old dream that was.
Boys would,
Sophie said. These here is all girls' dreams on this shelf, the BFG said.
Can I read a boy's dream?
You can, the BFG said. and he lifted her to a higher shelf. The label on the nearest boy's dream jar read as follows: I is making myself a marvelous pair of suction boots, and when I put them on, I is able to walk straight up the kitchen wall and across the ceiling. Well, I is walking upside down on the ceiling when my big sister comes in, and she starts to yell at me, as she always does, yelling, "What on earth is you doing up there walking on the ceiling?" And I looks down at her, and I smiles, and I says, "I told you you was driving me up the wall, and now you has done it."
I find that one rather silly,
Sophie said. "Boys wouldn't," the BFG said, grinning. "It's another bell ringer. Perhaps you has seen enough now."
Let me read another boy's one,
Sophie said. The next label said, The telephone rings in our house, and my father picks it up and says in his very important telephone voice, "Simpkins speaking." Then his face goes white, and his voice goes all funny, and he says, "What? Who?" And then he says, "Yes, sir, I understand, sir, but surely it is me you wish to speak to, sir, not my little son." My father's face is going from white to dark purple, and he is gulping like he has a lobster stuck in his throat, and then at last he is saying, "Yes, sir, very well, sir, I will get him, sir." And then he turns to me, and he says in a rather respectful voice, "Is you knowing the President of the United States?" And I says, "No, but I expect he is hearing about me." Then I is having a long talk on the phone, and saying things like, "Let me take care of it, Mr. President. You'll bungle it all up if you do it your way." And my father's eyes is goggling right out of his head, and that is when I is hearing my father's real voice saying, "Get up, you lazy slob, or you'll be late for school."
Boys are crazy, Sophie said. Let me read this next one.
Sophie started reading the next label. I is having a bath, and I is discovering that if I press quite hard on my tummy button, a funny feeling comes over me, and suddenly my legs is not there, nor is my arms. In fact, I has become absolutely invisible all over. I is still there, but no one can see me, not even myself. So my mummy comes in and says, "Where is that child? He was in the bath a minute ago, and he can't possibly have washed himself properly." So I says, "Here I is." And she says, "Where?" And I say, "Here." And she says, "Where?" And I says, "Here." And she yells, "Henry, come up quick." And when my daddy rushes in, I is washing myself, and my daddy sees the soap floating around in the air, but of course he is not seeing me, and he shouts, "Where are you, boy?" And I says, "Here." And he says, "Where?" And I says, "Here." And he says, "Where?" And I says, "Here." And he says, "The soap, boy, the soap. It's flying in the air." Then I press my tummy button again, and now I is visible. My daddy is squiffy with excitement, and he says, "You is the invisible boy." And I says, "Now I is going to have some fun." So when I is out of the bath and I have dried myself, I put on my dressing gown and slippers, and I press my tummy button again to become invisible, and I go down into the town and walk in the streets. Of course, only me is visible, but not the things I is wearing. So when people is seeing a dressing gown and slippers floating along the street with nobody in it, there is a panic with everybody yelling, "A ghost! A ghost!" And people is screaming left and right, and big strong policemen is running for their lives, and best of all, I see Mr. Grummet, my algebra teacher, coming out of a pub, and I float up to him and I say, "Boo!" And he lets out a frightsome howl and dashes back into the pub, and then I is waking up and feeling happy as a quisquiddler.
Pretty ridiculous,
Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button to see if it worked. Nothing happened. Dreams is very mystical things, the BFG said. Human beings is not understanding them at all. Not even the brainiest professors is understanding them. Has you seen enough?
Just this last one, Sophie said. This one here.
She started reading. I has written a book, and it is so exciting no one can put it down. As soon as you has read the first line, You is so hooked on it, you cannot stop until the last page. In all the cities, people is walking in the streets, bumping into each other because their faces is buried in my book, and dentists is reading it and trying to fill teeth at the same time, but nobody minds because they is all reading it too in the dentist chair. Drivers is reading it while driving, and cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeons is reading it while they is operating on brains, and airline pilots is reading it and going to Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down, and so is Olympic runners while they is running. Everybody has to see what is going to happen next in my book, and when I wake up, I is still tingling with excitement at being the greatest writer the world has ever seen. Until my mummy comes in and says I was looking at your English exercise book last night, and really your spelling is atrocious, so is your punctuation. That's enough for now, the BFG said. There's dillions more, but my arm is getting tired holding you up.
What are those over there? Sophie said. Why have they got such tiny labels?
That, the BFG said, is because one day I is catching so many dreams, I is not having the time or energy to write out long labels. But there is enough to remind me.
Can I look?
Sophie said. The long-suffering BFG carried her across to the jars she was pointing to. Sophie read them rapidly, one after another. I is climbing Mount Everest with just my pussycat for company. I is inventing a car that runs on toothpaste. I is able to make the electric lights go on and off just by wishing it. I is only an 8-year-old little boy, but I is growing a splendid bushy beard, and all the other boys is jealous. I is able to jump out of any high window and float down safely. I has a pet bee that makes rock and roll music when it flies.
Well, that amazes me, Sophie said. Is how you ever learned to write in the first place.
Ah, said the BFG. I has been wondering how long it is before you was asking me that.
Considering you never went to school, I think it's quite marvelous, Sophie said. How did you learn?
The BFG crossed the cave and opened a tiny secret door in the wall. He took out a book, very old and tattered. By human standards, it was an ordinary-sized book, but it looked like a postage stamp in his huge hand. One night, he said, I is blowing a dream through the window, and I sees this book lying on a little boy's bedroom table. I wanted it so very badly, you understand, but I is refusing to steal it. I would never do that.
So, how did you get it?
Sophie asked. I borrowed it, the BFG said, smiling a little. Just for a short time, I borrowed it.
How long have you had it?
Sophie asked. Perhaps only about 80 years, the BFG said. Soon I shall be putting it back.
And that's how you taught yourself to write?
Sophie asked him. I is reading it hundreds of times, the BFG said. And I is reading it and teaching new words to myself and how to write them. It is the most scrumdiddlyumptious story. Sophie took the book out of his hand.
Nicholas Nickleby, she read aloud.
By Dahl's chickens, the BFG said.
By who?
Sophie said. Just then, there came a tremendous noise of galloping feet from outside the cave.
What's that?
Sophie cried. That is all the giants zip-fizzing off to another country to guzzle human beings, the BFG said. He quickly popped Sophie into his waistcoat and hurried to the cave entrance and rolled back the stone. Sophie, peeping out of her spy hole, saw all 9 of the fearsome giants coming past at full gallop. Where is you off to tonight? Shouted the BFG. We is all flush bunking off to England tonight, answered the flesh lump eater as they went galloping past. England is a luxurious land, and we is fancying a few little English childlers. Oi, shouted the maid masher. as knowing where there's a giggle house for girls, and I is guzzling myself full as a froth blower.
And I is knowing where there's a boggle box for boys,
shouted the gizzard gulper.
All I has to do is reach in and grab myself a handful. English boys is all tasting extra lick swishy.
In a few minutes, the 9 galloping giants were out of sight.
What did he mean?
Sophie said, poking her head out of the pocket.
What is a giggle house for girls?
He is meaning a girls' school, the BFG said. He will be eating them by the bundle.
Oh no,
cried Sophie. And boys from a boys' school, said the BFG.
It mustn't happen, Sophie cried out. We've got to stop them. We can't just sit here and do nothing.
That is not a thing we can do, the BFG said. We is helpless as horse feathers. He sat down on a long, craggy blue rock near the entrance of his cave. He took Sophie from his pocket and put her beside him on the rock. It is now quite safe for you to be outside until they is coming back, he said. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and it was getting dark.
We absolutely got to stop them, Sophie cried. Put me back in your pocket quick, and we'll chase after them and warn everyone in England they're coming.
Redonkulous and impossible, the PFG said. They is going 2 times as fast as me, and they is finishing their guzzle before we is halfway.
But we can't just sit here doing nothing, Sophie cried. How many girls and boys are they going to eat tonight?
Many, the BFG said. The flesh-eating giant alone has a most squaggling wopsy appetite.
Will he snatch them out of their beds while they're sleeping?
Like peas out of a poodle, the BFG said.
I can't bear to think of it,
Sophie cried. Then don't, the BFG said. For years and years I is sitting here on this very rock every night after night when they is galloping away, and I is feeling so sad for all the human beings they is going to gobble up. But I has had to get used to it. There is nothing I can do. If I wasn't a titchy little runty giant only 24 feet high, then I would be stopping them. But that is absolutely out the window.
Do you always know where they're going?
Sophie asked. Always, the BFG said. Every night they is yelling at me as they go bottling by. The other day they was yelling, "We is off to Mississippi and Missouri to guzzle them both."
Disgusting, Sophie said. I hate them.
She and the big friendly giant sat quietly side by side on the blue rock in the gathering dusk. Sophie had never felt so helpless in her life. After a while, she stood up and cried out,
I can't stand it. Just think of all those poor girls and boys who are going to be eaten alive in a few hours' time. We can't just sit here and do nothing. We've got to go after those brutes.
No, the BFG said.
We must, Sophie cried. Why won't you go?
The BFG sighed and shook his head firmly. I has told you 5 or 6 times, he said. The third will be the last. I is never showing myself to human beings.
Why ever not?
If I do, they will be putting me in the zoo with all the jiffy raffies and caddy piddlers.
Nonsense, Sophie said.
And they will be sending you straight back to an orphanage, the BFG went on. Grown-up human beings is not famous for their kindness. They is all squiffle rotters and grink sludgers.
That simply isn't true,
Sophie cried angrily.
Some of them are very kind indeed.
Who? The BFG said. Name one.
The Queen of England, Sophie said. You can't call her a squiffle rotter or a grink sludger.
Well, the BFG said.
You can't call her a squeak pip or a not muncher either, Sophie said,
getting angrier and angrier. The flesh eater is longing dearly to guzzle her up, the BFG said, smiling a little now.
Who? The Queen?
Sophie cried, aghast. Yes, the BFG answered. Flesh eater says he has never actually eaten a queen, and he thinks perhaps she has an especially scrumdiddlyumptious flavour.
How dare he?
Sophie cried. But Flesh eater says there is too many soldiers around her palace, and he daresn't try it.
He better not,
Sophie said. He is also saying he would very much like to guzzle one of those soldiers in his pretty red suit, but he is worried about those big black furry hats they is wearing. He thinks they might be sticking in his throat.
I hope he chokes,
Sophie said. Flesh eater is a very careful giant, the BFG said. Sophie was silent for a few minutes. Then, suddenly, in a voice filled with excitement, she cried out,
I've got it! By golly, I think I've got it!
Got what? Said the BFG.
The answer, cried Sophie. We'll go to the Queen. It's a terrific idea. If I went and told the Queen about these disgusting man-eating giants, I'm sure she'd do something about it.
The BFG looked down at her sadly and shook his head. She is never believing you, he said. Never in a month of Mondays.
I think she would.
Never, the BFG said. It is sounding such a wonky-told story. The Queen will be laughing and saying, What awful rubbish!
She would not.
Of course she would, the BFG said. I has told you before that human beings is simply not believing in giants.
Then it's up to us to find a way of making her believe in them,
Sophie said. And how is you getting in to see the Queen anyway? The BFG asked.
Now, hold on a sec, Sophie said. Just you hold on a sec, because I've got another idea.
Your ideas is full of crosswoggle, the BFG said.
Not this one,
Sophie said.
You say that if we tell the Queen, she would never believe us.
I is certain she wouldn't, the BFG said.
But we aren't going to tell her, Sophie said excitedly. We don't have to tell her. We'll make her dream it.
That is an even more fuff-bungling suggestion, the BFG said. Dreams is lots of fun, but nobody is believing in dreams either. You was only believing in a dream while you was actually dreaming it. But as soon as you was waking up, you was saying, Oh, thank goodness, it was only a dream.
Don't you worry about that part of it, Sophie said. I can fix that.
Never can you fix it, the BFG said.
I can. I swear I can. But first of all, let me ask you a very important question. Here it is. Can you make a person dream absolutely anything in the world?
Anything you like, the BFG said proudly.
If I said I wanted to dream that I was in a flying bathtub with silver wings, could you make me dream it?
I could, the BFG said.
But how? Sophie said. You obviously don't have exactly that dream in your collection.
I do not, the BFG said, but I could soon be mixing it up.
How could you mix it up?
It is a little bit like mixing a cake, the BFG said. If you is putting the right amount of all the different things into it, you is making the cake come out any way you want. Sugary, spongy, curranty, Christmassy, grubswitchy. It's all the same with dreams.
Go on,
Sophie said. I has dillions of dreams on my shelves, right or left?
Right,
Sophie said. I has dreams about bathtubs, lots of them. I has dreams about silver wings. I has dreams about flying. So all I has to do is mix those dreams together in the proper way, and I is very quickly making a dream where you is flying in a bathtub with silver wings.
I see what you mean, Sophie said. But I didn't know you could mix one dream with another.
Dreams like to be mixed, BFG answered. They is getting very lonesome all by themselves in those glassy bottles.
Right, Sophie said. Now then, do you have dreams about the Queen of England?
Lots of them, the BFG said.
And about giants?
Of course.
And about giants eating people?
Swiggles of them, the BFG said.
And about little girls like me?
Those is the most commonest of all, the BFG said. I has bottles and bottles about little girls.
And you could mix them all up just exactly as I want you to?
Sophie asked, getting more and more excited. Of course, the BFG said. But how is this helping us? I think you is barking up the wrong dog.
Now hold on, Sophie said. Listen carefully. I want you to mix a dream which you will blow into the Queen of England's bedroom while she is asleep. And this is how it will go.
Now hang on a minute, the BFG said. How is I possibly going to get near enough to the Queen of England's bedroom to blow in my dreams? You is talking dumb silly.
I'll tell you that later, Sophie said. For the moment, please listen carefully. Here is the dream I want you to mix. Are you paying attention?
Very close, the BFG said.
I want the Queen to dream that 9 disgusting giants, each one about 50 feet tall, are galloping to England in the night. She must dream their names as well. What are their names again?
Flesh Lump Eater, the BFG said. Man Hugger, Bone Cruncher, Child Chewer, Meat Dripper, Gizzard Gulper, Maid Masher, Blood Bottler, and the Butcher Boy.
Let her dream all those names, Sophie said. And let her dream that they will be creeping into England in the depths of the witching hour and snatching little boys and girls from their bed. Let her dream that they will be reaching into the bedroom windows and pulling the little boys and girls out of their beds, and then...
Sophie paused.
Do they eat them on the spot, or do they carry them away first? She asked.
They is usually just popping them straight into their mouths like popcorn.
Ugh, put that into the dream, Sophie said. And then the dream must say that when their tummies are full, they will go galloping back to giant country where no one can find them.
Is that all? The BFG said.
Certainly not, Sophie said. You must then explain to the Queen in her dream that there is a big, friendly giant who can tell where all the beasts are living, so that she can send her soldiers and her armies to capture them once and for all. And now let her dream one last and very important thing. Let her dream that there is a little girl called Sophie sitting on her windowsill who will tell her exactly where the big, friendly giant is hiding.
Where is he hiding? Asked the big, friendly giant.
We'll come to that later, Sophie said. So the Queen dreams her dream, right?
Right, the BFG said.
Then she wakes up and the first thing she thinks is, oh, what a horrid dream! I'm so glad it was only a dream. And then she looks up from her pillow and what does she see?
What does she see? The BFG asked.
She sees a little girl called Sophie sitting on her windowsill right there in real life before her eyes.
How is you going to be sitting on the windowsill of the Queen, may I beg? The BFG said.
You are going to put me there, Sophie said. And that's the lovely part about it. If someone dreams that there is a little girl sitting on her windowsill, and then she wakes up and sees that the little girl really is sitting there, that's a dream come true, is it not?
I is beginning to see where you is driving to, the BFG said. If a queen is knowing that part of her dream is true, then perhaps she is believing the rest of it is true as well.
That's about it, Sophie said. But I shall have to convince her of that myself.
You said you was wanting the dream to say there is a big friendly giant who is also going to talk to the Queen?
Absolutely, Sophie said. You must. You're the only one who can tell her where to find the other giants.
How is I meeting the Queen? Asked the BFG. I is not wanting to be shooted at by her soldiers.
The soldiers are only in the front of the palace, Sophie said. At the back, there's a huge garden, and there are no soldiers in there at all. There's a very high wall with spikes around the garden to stop people climbing in. But you could simply walk over that.
How is you knowing all about his Queen's palace? The BFG said.
Last year I was in a different orphanage, Sophie said. It was in London, and we used to go for walks all around there.
Is you helping me find this palace? The BFG asked. I has never dared to go hide and sneaking in London in my life.
I'll show you the way,
Sophie said confidently. I is frightened of London, the BFG said.
Don't be, Sophie said. It's full of tiny dark streets, and there are very few people around in the witching hour.
The BFG picked Sophie up between one finger and thumb and placed her gently in the palm of the other hand. Is the Queen's palace very big? He asked.
Huge,
Sophie said. Then how is we finding the right bedroom?
That's up to you, Sophie said. You're supposed to be an expert at that sort of thing.
And you's absolutely sure the Queen will not put me in a zoo with all the caterpillars?
Of course she won't, Sophie said. You'll be a hero, and you'll never have to eat snozcumbers again.
Sophie saw the BFG's eyes widen. He licked his lips. You mean it? He said. You really mean it? No more disgusting schnozcumbers?
You couldn't get one if you wanted to, Sophie said. Humans don't grow them.
That did it. The BFG got to his feet. When is you want me to mix this special dream? He asked.
Now, Sophie said. At once.
When is we going to see the Queen? He said.
Tonight, Sophie said. As soon as you've mixed up the dream.
Tonight? The BFG cried. Why such a flush, bunkle, and flurry?
If we can't save tonight's children, we can anyway save tomorrow's, Sophie said. What is more, I'm getting famished. I haven't had a thing to eat for 24 hours.
Then we better get crockling, the BFG said, moving back towards the cave. Sophie kissed him on the tip of his thumb.
I knew you'd do it, she said. Come on, let's hurry.
And that's all for today. Again, we are reading The BFG by Roald Dahl. And Molly slept through the whole thing. So let's give her a cookie. Say, and Jaeger. Yes, Jaeger, there you are. All right. Okay, Jaeger, there you go.
Molly.
Jaeger, sit. There you go. All right, everybody. Have a good afternoon, and I'll see you tomorrow.